Our Plant Stories has been nominated as a finalist in the Independent Podcast Awards in a new category called Environment and Natural World. I'll let you know how we get on. Thanks to all those who are regular supporters of the podcast with their commitment to buying a monthly coffee. And to Anne, who also sent some caffeine my way this month, all of which goes towards paying for this podcast, the hosting platform and the editing programme. The link is in the show notes. And now, a plant story. Welcome to Our Plant Stories. Over the past episodes, people with a passion for plants have given us so much amazing advice about growing them. And all that advice and photos are on ourplantstories.com. I'll of course put this week's advice on too, and this week's episode is all about taking a cutting. Not just any old cutting, but a cutting from a very specific tree, which has a very important connection to Emma. So, join us on a Magnolia Tree tour around Hackney in London.
This is a really amazing one that I used to walk past on the way home at the school run. I think this one is a stellata, that comes out with little white starry ones rather than the big things, but this is the non-technical person talking. We need the magnolia expert.
By the time we found you a magnolia expert, you realise you are going to walk past this and identify it exactly, aren't you?
Exactly.
But it's not yours, so let's keep going. No.
No. So mine is like 30, I'd say, because I know that my oldest son is 29, so that means we can date the tree as being 30.
There's another one?
Yeah.
Wow.
There's another one.
This must be beautiful when they all come out.
This whole row is amazing.
Emma Dogliani is a musician, a classical singer, soprano. She loves opera. She also teaches singing and piano. She started working in Pentonville Prison as a prison visitor one morning a week. Within a year, she had begun bringing fellow musicians into the prison and they performed concerts. She has now started a charity called East London Metropolitan Opera. I'll put all the links in the show notes on the website. This plant story begins some 30 years ago when she was a young woman.
Before moving to East London, I lived in North London and I sort of not long got married. And my very first pregnancy, I sadly had a miscarriage. It wasn't like a really late one or something. It was about 3 months, but it was just sad, and it was kind of, for me, one of the first things that had sort of personally gone wrong somehow. I was so lucky up until then and everything, in many ways, and didn't have that many challenges when I was growing up. I had a lovely time. But I suppose I'd sailed through things rather, and I just sort of thought I would sail through this pregnancy, so I'd sort of told everybody, and then went for a scan and that there was no heartbeat. And yeah, I just remember feeling a bit silly actually, that I'd sort of got so carried away and just assumed it would all be okay. And once I read about it a bit, and I knew it was a really common thing, miscarriage. But anyway, it was a sad time. And somebody, I don't actually remember who, said sometimes it's nice to do something like plant something in a kind of memory, because the odd thing about a miscarriage is there's sort of nothing. So I went on a little trip with my husband Serge to a garden centre, not something we normally did, and I honestly can't remember why I asked about a magnolia, but I think it was probably because I just knew they were special things. So we bought a magnolia and we bought a pot and we took a little bit of advice, and I even got some food, which I think is quite, I don't know, sort of I didn't just ignore it. I made a bit more effort than sort of previous plants I'd owned that had just died. I did feed it. I remember my mum being a little bit worried because she said they can sometimes be tricky and you'll be upset if something happens to it. But I didn't feel that invested, but I don't know. I'd looked after it anyway. And we then moved about a year or so later over to East London, and it was still in its pot outside the front door, and it was doing very well. Yep, started to flower, big excitement, got a bit bigger, still in its pot. It was a big pot, and then we lived there for about 4 years and moved again, not very far. We moved to our last house in Hackney, and then there was a sort of area outside the front of the house, and we planted it. So it was doing quite well. It was a sort of dug out bit in front of the basement. So it wasn't just like putting it into the earth, but it was quite a big area. But it just flourished, and it got bigger and bigger, and it just started being quite an important part of the street. People would stop and admire it. And at Christmas we used to put baubles on it, and little red baubles, and people used to even take photographs of it. So it's not huge, but it's still there. So we actually moved a year and a half ago, and that was hard because we'd lived in that house for 20 years then at that time, and I did feel really sad about the magnolia. But the people who bought the house really loved it. They would sort of say, "Oh, it's the one with the magnolia," and I know they're going to look after it. They're not going to sort of dig it up or anything. Here we go. Oh my God, there's all scaffolding all over it. Oh yeah, they're doing a huge job on it. I hope the tree's going to be all right. Blimey. Oh, this is my old house. They put doors around it. Wow.
It's kind of going up around and in between the scaffolding, really, isn't it?
Yeah. I guess I'm sure they'll be being careful. But yeah, scaffolding right over it. Hi, sorry, I just used to live here and we're just looking at the tree. Is it going to be all right, the tree?
I'm an electrician.
Right. Oh my God.
Well, it's in bud.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty resilient. It's not looking its best. I'm sorry.
I think it's going to be a survivor. I have great hopes for this tree, and I think it'd be a great idea to take some cuttings.
But yeah, cuttings would be good. Good insurance. That's my old neighbour. Hi, Adrian.
Oh, hello. Hello, how are you?
We're a bit worried about the magnolia.
Oh, yeah.
Is it going to be all right?
This I cannot say.
The thing about the magnolia was that it became such a happy thing, and I do think that, you know, when we bought it, it was such a sad time, and of course we were very, very lucky. We went on to have 3 healthy children, and they grew up with this tree, and of course if I'd known then that I was going to have 3 healthy children, it would have been much easier to deal with, and a lot of people aren't as lucky. But anyway, the tree was a lovely positive, and I do still, there is a connection with it. If I walk up that street, and I'm still in London quite a bit, I'll always touch the tree.
If you have a plant story that you would like to share, you can email me on sally@ourplantstories.com. I really wanted to find Emma someone who could tell her how to take a successful cutting from her tree. She'd tried taking some cuttings before she moved away, but they didn't take. I knew the perfect person. He has enormous knowledge about trees, and he's a teacher. He taught me on my RHS Level 2. Joe Woodcock began his career in horticulture in the early 70s with a 4-year apprenticeship followed by a degree. He worked for the Royal Parks and ended his career running the management of trees for the Royal Borough of Greenwich. I sent him a photograph of Emma's tree, partially obscured by the scaffolding.
I've seen the photograph of the one that you've got, and I think it's Magnolia Soulangiana, which is a species hybrid. So it does tend to grow quite tall. And the reason they're not my favourite plant for a small area, particularly Magnolia Soulangiana, because they do grow so tall, and by the middle of the summer they tend to cast a lot of shade. Just quickly, some of my favourites are there's Magnolia stellata, which is a small star-shaped flower, it's absolutely beautiful. There's one called Lobneri, which has more of a smaller cup-shaped flower, tulip-type flower than Solangiana, but the same sort of shape, but that little bit smaller. And then my other favourite, which I grew at when I was in charge of the gardens at Elton Palace, is Magnolia grandiflora, which is the evergreen one, and has the lovely cream flower, usually in about the middle of the summer.
What do we know about magnolias?
Their origins, they come from Asia. Their grandiflora comes from North America. There are some of them that are thought to come from Europe. They're a very, very old species, over 100 million years old, and they were originally pollinated by beetles before bees evolved. So they're quite interesting from that point of view. You said that you've pruned it at times. They're not necessarily the best tree to prune, to be honest with you. They don't take too kindly to being pruned.
I just was going to say that the other magnolias around, though, are mainly in bigger spaces, and I am a bit worried, and you said this at the beginning, Joe, that particular tree now is getting quite big. I mean, presumably it can't go on forever in that little space, can it? Or what will happen?
No, trees are like us. You've had children, they go through growth spurts, don't they, when they're young. We tend to slow our growth as we get older. We may grow one way, and that's around our girth. Okay, all of us do that, called middle-age spread. And trees do exactly the same. They slow their growth, but they do tend to just slowly grow, outwards more. Because a lot of people, question, well, is a magnolia, amongst other plants, is it a tree or is it a shrub? Well, the definition is that the tree will have an obvious single trunk or stem, whereas a shrub is multi-stem from the base. Now, I've seen a photograph of the one that you had in that garden, and I believe it to be a tree. So the issue botanically is that anatomically they're all the same. They're both woody perennials, whether it's a tree shape or a shrub shape. I mean, if you bought Magnolia stellata, invariably you buy a shrub. It's multi-stem from the base. And usually smaller in size, ultimate size, height and spread. But the one you've got seems to me to be a tree. Now that's got advantages and disadvantages in relation to propagation, which I believe is what you're really interested in, because you want to take a cutting possibly from it. One of the commonest ways of propagating a magnolia is to layer it. So if you had a shrub, if you could imagine, you had low growing branches, and those branches make contact with the soil, they may produce roots. You can assist the plant, if that was your way of propagating it, by pinning the roots down to the ground, making a sharp cut, into an area of tissue we call the cambium, and then just pegging that part of the plant into the ground. And a year later, you will find that roots will have appeared, and you can just detach that from the mother plant, pot it up, and grow it on. But if it's a tree, then that obviously to some extent restricts your options for propagation. So another option, I think, for your plants, given that it is over 30 years old, would be to try a form of softwood stem cutting, known as a greenwood cutting. And if you look this up on on Google, you will see that a greenwood cutting is a cutting that is taken a little bit later in the year. And in the case of your magnolia, I'm going to suggest, obviously it depends on the weather conditions and how the plant grows, but I was suggesting about the middle of June, end of May, maybe through to June time, and you would get possibly something like a 7.5 centimetre cutting of current season's growth. That's the growth that it's made this year, and you could propagate from that and take it at what we call a node. So that's a joint where the leaves appear. So if you take this cutting of about 7.5 centimetres in length, and then if you prepare a mix of, let's say, 50% peat-free multi-purpose compost, and either perlite, vermiculite, or indeed sharp sand. So you've got 50-50 of both. And in a square pot, if you take 4 cuttings from all around the tree, but they must be current growth, would produce this year, and put those cuttings, once you've taken them at the node, into this pot in the 4 corners of a square pot. Square pot, 10 centimetre, 9 centimetre pot would do. If it's bigger, it can't hurt for it to be a wee bit bigger than that. And then put a clear plastic tent of some sort over the top, just to keep the humidity in. Now, I'm just going to go back a step in relation to taking this cutting, because you will have taken it from current season growth. You will have taken it as a nodal cutting. Any leaves that may be there at the nodes that will go underneath the soil, underneath the ground, cut them off so that otherwise they will rot away. And the leaves that are above the ground, once you put the cutting in, you want to try and reduce the number of leaves. And the way that you can do that is by literally cutting off the leaves that are above the ground. So let's say, for example, you've got 5 leaves above the ground. It may pay you to take 2 of those, the 2 largest ones, off. Cut them off with a sharp knife, and leaving you just the 3 maybe at the top. And that will reduce the loss of water from the plant. Once you take a cutting, you've actually taken away the life support system of the plant by removing that cutting from its roots. What you've got to do once you've taken the cutting is prepare it, as I've mentioned, in such a way that it will survive. And one of the major reasons for it failing would be that it loses water. So that's why you put it in the clear polythene tent. That reduces the loss of water, because you've increased the humidity around the plant. There's only one other thing you can do, which may or may not help, and that's dab the base of the cutting at the node in some rooting hormone. Now, rooting hormone, which you've probably seen or heard of on gardening programs, etc., rooting hormone is, if you like, a derivative of a chemical that is naturally found in plants, known as a group of chemicals known as auxins. And those auxins are growth hormones. And if you dab the end of the cutting into that material, it increases the concentration of that growth hormone at the point where you want the roots to grow. And so therefore, all of the nutrients, all of the requirements for growth of that cutting will be directed down to the base of the cutting. So it's more likely to be successful. The only other thing I'd say is don't just take 4, take 8, take 12 of them. Usually I get 1 or 2 that produce roots. So, that might work.
How will Emma know if it's rooted?
How will you know if it's rooted? That is a really good question. I think the foolproof way to know that it's rooted is to, after, say, 2 weeks or so, just take the plastic top off the pot and give them a very gentle tug. And if they are anchored by roots, obviously they won't pull out. I've heard various gardeners say, you'll know because they produced a flower. Not so much with magnolia, but with other plants that have taken from cuttings. And that's not necessarily true, that it means that they've rooted. And the reason for that is it could mean that the chemicals in the stem have now gone up to produce a flower, because the flower is the reproductive part of the plant. And as it's the reproductive part of the plant, if a plant thinks it's going to die, which the ex-plant will, because it's no longer got any roots, it will say, my word, in nature, I've got to reproduce my species. And so it will send all of its nutrients, etc., up to produce a flower, rather than going down to where you want them to produce a root. So seeing a flower bud doesn't necessarily show that the plant's rooted. Now, a couple more of important points, if I may. It might be a rather obvious point with magnolia, and that is, don't take wood that has a flower on it or a developing fruit on it. So in other words, the petals have now died off, and you've got a fruit developing there. Don't take that wood, because that wood will be exhausted and will not produce roots. It's got to be what we call vegetative growth.
I think I might have done that because, I did try before we moved. But I
Yes.
just looked on YouTube, but I think there's quite
Yes.
a few things I did have the root hormone but I think the actual bit I cut was probably the wrong bit.
Yes.
And I think that some of them might have had things going on, and I thought,
Yes.
that looks
Yes.
good,
Yes. Yes. It mustn't be wood that's either flowered or has had a fruit. In fact, with a lot of softwood cuttings that we take, so we take pelargoniums and fuchsias from softwood cuttings. When you're looking for the material to take, you always take a non-flowering growth from the plant. And if you see a bud there, you pinch the bud out, because otherwise, the growth will go straight away. It's nature, straight away to the flower, so that it could then hopefully affect pollination and reproduce its species.
And if that tiny cutting, or one of those tiny cuttings, or maybe, Emma, all of those tiny cuttings take, how long do we have to wait before we're actually looking at a magnolia tree that will bloom?
Well, you're going to be waiting quite a long time, to be honest with you, for one that's going to bloom. And obviously it depends on the conditions, but, it's going to be years rather than the following year, I'm afraid.
How many?
If I said between 5 and 10 years, I think it would be.
That would be okay though, wouldn't it,
Yes.
Emma? Because is it for you, Emma? Is it more about, and thank you for that, that's a fantastically detailed way. And if you want me to come with you, Emma, I'm very happy to come with you when we go do the cutting.
Definitely, because it's just spotting exactly where to cut.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it is something about that particular plant, because you could go to a garden centre and buy another one, couldn't you? That's not what you want.
Yeah, exactly. There is a thing that I would like. I have considered going and buying another one, but I haven't got around to that. It would be fantastic even if it was just, doesn't get very far if it was starting off. So, that would be brilliant.
I have actually moved magnolias. So I moved a magnolia from my wife's cousin's garden in Cheshunt, and we replanted it in Spain, where she now lives. So it is possible to.
Sorry, did you just say Spain?
Yes, we did. Yes. Yeah.
What did you do? How did you get it there?
Yeah, they had it was a stellata to start with, and it was a bit smaller, and they had a large car.
So Emma and I are going to try to take some cuttings, but if all that fails, anyone got a large car? I don't want to make assumptions, but if waiting 10 years for a bloom on your magnolia tree doesn't appeal, here is this week's guide to how to grow the plant. Is there a good time to buy a magnolia tree? A best time to buy a magnolia tree?
Yeah, the best, I would say the optimum time is to buy in the autumn. Then the plant gets a chance to get its roots down into the ground before, the worst of the winter, which usually nowadays after Christmas. And then, most importantly, to get the roots down into the ground before the spring and summer. And our spring and summers recently have been quite hot and dry. So I would suggest that that's the best time of year.
Okay. And I kind of know the answer to this question because Emma obviously did it, but can I grow it in a pot?
Yes.
Or do you think really I have to put it in the ground?
No.
Or would you say no, you've got a few years?
Yeah, no. You can grow trees and shrubs in pots. Obviously, it depends on the tree or shrub that you're buying. The larger the pot, generally the better quality potting compost. And, if it's going to be in a pot for a long time, then John Innes number 3 is the one that's probably going to give you the amount of nutrient that the plant would need. And keep it watered. And then as it grows, make sure it's fed, because the only issue about a woody perennial tree or shrub in a pot is that the nutrients can be used up, fairly quickly. And the roots have only got that volume of compost to get their nutrients from. So it's a good idea if it's a large pot and a reasonably large shrub. I'm thinking of a Magnolia stellata, something like that. It's a good idea to take some of the compost away from the surface and replace with new compost. I would suggest every spring, in order to give extra nutrient, and then maybe a liquid feed during the summertime. So I think with most potted plants that's important.
And your favourites?
My favourites,
Magnolias?
Yes, stellata. I think you probably realise that from now. I've been speaking about it during the course of this podcast. Lobnerai, Solangiana, I like, in a larger garden personally. Grandiflora makes a wonderful evergreen tree or shrub. Very, very good as a wall shrub.
Have you got any magnolias in your own garden?
Stellata. Got Magnolia Stellata.
Is there anything we haven't answered for you, Emma? You feel you're equipped? You and I are going to go down about June time, yes?
Yeah, it's brilliant. And I think I might even buy myself a stellata as well.
Yeah, yes.
Our Plant Stories is presented and produced by me, Sally Flatman. And if you've listened all the way to the end of this episode, I would love it if you would perhaps think about going to your podcasting app and rating and reviewing for me. Or you could go onto the website and leave a comment. As we come to the end of this first series of Our Plant Stories, it would be lovely to get a sense of what people have liked, what they would like more of. The idea is that there will be offshoots that will continue once a month and take us through to the second series of Our Plant Stories. I have already, truth be told, started finding stories for series 2, and that's exciting. And I have just loved meeting so many generous people, generous gardeners who have shared their knowledge with us all and some beautiful stories. So thank you for being part of this podcasting journey. Thank you for listening. If you want to show your support for this podcast via Buy Me a Coffee, then the link is in the show notes or on the website ourplantstories.com. I promise you, your virtual coffee will go towards the podcast, not plants.